Sophie didn't know what she expected when she agreed to meet Damien Vortiga the next day, but she certainly hadn't expected to find herself standing in the grand, dimly lit halls of his mansion. The place was both imposing and beautiful, with towering windows and high ceilings, the kind of place where shadows stretched longer than the light could reach. The kind of place where even a whisper felt like it might echo forever. Her footsteps echoed through the marble floors as she followed one of Damien's bodyguards down a long corridor. They passed door after door, each more intricate and grand than the last, but Sophie barely noticed the lavishness around her. Her mind was elsewhere, on Damien, on the strange, compelling reason he'd brought her here. Alma had been the reason, of course. He had asked her to protect his mother, to keep her company. But Sophie now knew there was more at stake than just that. There had been something in Damien's voice when he spoke about his mother, something that spoke to the vulnerability hidden behind his tough, unyielding exterior. The bodyguard finally stopped before a large door, nodding for Sophie to enter. Sophie hesitated for just a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was simple compared to the rest of the mansion, but it was warm, filled with soft lighting and the scent of fresh flowers. Alma sat by the window, a book resting on her lap, her fingers tracing the cover as if lost in her thoughts. When Alma saw Sophie, her face lit up with that same smile Sophie had come to cherish. The connection between them was already strong, unspoken, but real. Alma signed a greeting to Sophie, her hands moving fluidly through the air. Sophie smiled softly and signed back, "Good morning, Alma. How are you today?" Alma signed, "I'm well, my dear," before patting the chair beside her, inviting Sophie to sit. Sophie moved across the room, lowering herself into the chair. She hadn't been told exactly what her role would be here, but as the days passed, it became clear. She wasn't just a caretaker or a companion. No, she had stepped into something much larger than that. She had become part of a family that operated in ways Sophie still couldn't fully understand. But she did understand one thing. Damien's world was dangerous, and she was now a part of it. Meanwhile, Damien sat in his office, staring out the window that overlooked the city below. His thoughts were troubled. Alma, his mother, had never truly been a part of his world. He had kept her safe, yes, but he had never really seen her. Not until Sophie had come into their lives. She had changed things in ways Damien wasn't sure he could control. There was something about the way she moved, the way she interacted with his mother, something that made him feel both grateful and uneasy. She was not like anyone he had ever met, not like the women he had grown up around. Sophie was different, and for the first time in years, that difference made him feel something he hadn't in a long time: hope. But hope was a dangerous thing in a world like his. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. The bodyguard from earlier stepped inside, his face serious. "Boss, we have a problem," the man said. Damien's expression hardened. He stood up from his desk, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of problem?" "The Santoro family," the bodyguard replied. "They've made their move. They know about your mother, about Sophie." Damien's heart sank. The Santoros were one of the most powerful rival crime families in the city, and they had a reputation for being ruthless. If they were involved, it meant one thing: danger. "They're going after Sophie," the bodyguard continued. "They'll use her to get to you, to get to your mother." Damien clenched his fists, his jaw tightening with frustration. He had feared this day would come, but he had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. Sophie had become too important to him, to his family. He couldn't let them touch her. "Where is she?" Damien demanded. "She's with your mother." "Safe for now," the bodyguard said. Damien nodded, his mind already working. There was no time to waste. The Santoros were coming for them, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. He had to act fast, but even more than that, he needed to protect Sophie at all costs. Sophie spent the next few hours with Alma, the two of them sharing stories and laughter. Alma's presence was comforting, grounding Sophie in a way she didn't fully understand. But every now and then, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing on her shoulders. She had been brought into something dangerous. She knew it, and though she didn't want to admit it, she was scared. Just as she stood to leave, one of Damien's bodyguards appeared in the doorway. His face was set in the usual stern expression, but his eyes were alert, scanning the room. "Ms. Sophie," the bodyguard said, "it's time to go." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Go where? The bodyguard's expression remained unchanged. Damien has made arrangements. We need to move you. It's not safe here anymore. Sophie's stomach turned. She had sensed something was wrong, but this felt different. She glanced at Alma, who looked just as confused and concerned as Sophie felt. What's going on? Sophie asked, her voice tight. There's no time to explain, the bodyguard replied. Please come with me. Sophie hesitated, looking between Alma and the bodyguard. But she had no choice. She couldn't leave Alma here, not with the danger closing in. She turned back to the older woman and smiled, trying to reassure her, though the fear gnawed at her insides. I'll be back soon. Alma, stay here, stay safe. Alma's hands moved slowly, signing, Be careful, my dear. Sophie gave her one last smile before following the bodyguard down the hall, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where they were taking her, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed and there was no going back. Damien was waiting in a room at the far end of the mansion. His eyes were dark, his jaw clenched tight as he watched Sophie enter. There was a fierce protectiveness in his gaze, a look that made Sophie feel both safe and unsettled. He was the kind of man who was always in control, always calculating, and yet she could see the vulnerability beneath the surface. Sophie, Damien said, his voice steady but tense. I need to ask you to trust me. The Santoros are coming for you. They know about you now, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. The Santoros. The name alone sent a chill down her spine. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. We protect you, Damien said, his gaze never leaving hers, and we fight back. Sophie felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her, but something else was there too. Something that had been growing inside her since she first met Damien. A feeling of connection, of trust, that she didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. Damien took a step closer to her, his eyes softening. I'll keep you safe, Sophie. I promise. But even as he spoke, Sophie felt the storm closing in. The Santoros were coming, and there was no telling who would make it out alive. Cliffhanger. The door to the room slammed open and one of Damien's men rushed in. Boss, they're here! Damien's face darkened. Get ready. This ends tonight. Sophie's heart raced as she realized that the world she had stepped into was now more dangerous than ever, and it was too late to turn back. The city of Vernival was a place where shadows lived as much as people did. In the quiet corners and hidden alleyways, power ran deeper than the rivers that cut through its heart. Damien Vortiga, the Mafia boss who controlled the city's underworld, sat atop a throne built of fear, loyalty, and blood. But as powerful as he was, there were things he could not control. His mother, Alma, was one of those things. Alma lived a quiet life, or so it seemed to most people. She was a woman of few words, speaking only in the language of silence. But her silence wasn't voluntary. Born deaf, she had been cut off from the world of sound, a prisoner in a world that often failed to see her. She was used to the loneliness, but it was a loneliness she carried with quiet dignity. Most people, even her son, had learned to leave her be, communicating only when necessary. Damien had always been protective of her, but he never fully understood her. No one did, until Sophie entered the picture. Sophie was a waitress in the small cafe just a few blocks away from the Vortiga mansion, a place where the elite gathered but never noticed her. She had no family, no name to carry with pride. She was just a girl trying to make a living, but she had something no one else seemed to have, kindness, something that couldn't be bought, and something that couldn't be hidden behind a mask. It was a typical evening when Damien's black SUV pulled up to the cafe. He stepped out, tall and intimidating, his cold gaze sweeping over the room as if he were searching for something. His bodyguards moved quickly, and the usual hush fell over the cafe's patrons. They didn't speak of it, but they all knew. Damien Vortiga, the city's most dangerous man, was not here for pleasure. He never was, but something stopped him that night. It wasn't the fine wine or the wealth of the people in the room. It was a simple moment, a fleeting thing that he would later find impossible to forget. He saw Alma sitting alone at a corner table, her hands resting on her lap. A woman of her age, in her condition, could have been left unnoticed by the world, but not by Sophie. Sophie approached Alma's table with the quiet confidence she carried in everything she did. She had seen the woman before, but never in this light, never with the deep connection that now seemed to pulse between them. Sophie didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had learned sign language as a child, taught to her by a mother who had worked tirelessly to make her understand the unspoken words of the world. Sophie sat down beside Alma, her eyes soft. She signed gently, the movements of her hands graceful as she communicated something simple. "How are you today?" Alma's eyes widened, and for the first time in a long while a smile broke across her face. "I'm well," she signed back, her hands moving with a fluidity that matched Sophie's own. In that moment a connection was formed, a bond that went deeper than words, deeper than any noise the world could make. It was a bond of understanding, of seeing the unseen, of hearing the unheard. Damien, standing near the door, had been watching. He was used to people watching him, but never had he felt so unsettled by someone's gaze. He had seen his mother many times, but never like this. Never with someone who truly saw her. His heart, hardened by years of dealing with enemies and violence, did something unexpected. It softened. As the night wore on, he couldn't shake the image of Sophie sitting across from his mother. It was strange. His mother had always been distant, a woman of silence in a world that didn't care. But Sophie had made her seen, not as a burden or a mystery, but as a person. Damien's thoughts began to stir. He couldn't understand why it mattered so much, but something inside him had shifted. He had to know more about this girl. And more than that, he had to make sure she was safe. Later that night, after Sophie finished her shift, she stepped outside to a crisp breeze. The streetlights of Vernival flickered overhead as she walked down the cobbled path, her feet moving with the familiarity of someone who knew every crack in the pavement. But when she turned the corner, she was stopped by a voice, a deep, commanding voice that seemed to freeze time. "Sophie." She turned to find Damien standing there, his tall frame framed by the night. His bodyguards lingered behind him, their eyes always scanning, always alert. But it was his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that focused solely on her. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's about my mother." Sophie's heart raced, unsure of why he had approached her. She had sensed his power the moment she first saw him, but there was something else in his gaze now, something softer, almost desperate. "I don't know what you want," Sophie said, her voice cautious, her eyes scanning him for any hint of danger. She wasn't afraid, not yet, but she had learned to trust her instincts, and something told her this conversation would change everything. Damien took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "I want you to work for me," he said. "For my family." Sophie blinked, surprised by the request. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, his gaze not leaving hers, "I want you to take care of my mother. Keep her company. Protect her from the world, from everyone who doesn't see her. You're the only one who understands her." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Sophie could feel the weight of the offer, but she wasn't sure what it meant. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Why not someone else?" "Because," Damien said, his tone now a little softer, "I can trust you. I can see it in your eyes. You're the only person who hasn't looked at my mother like she's broken." Sophie's heart stuttered in her chest. There it was, the truth. Damien Vortiga, the powerful Mafia boss, was asking her for something simple, a promise to protect the one thing he cared about most. And just like that, Sophie realized that she was already in too deep. "Think about it," he said, stepping back. "I'll give you time. But remember, Sophie, I'll protect you. No one else will." As Damien turned to leave, Sophie's mind raced. She had known there would be danger in this world, but now it was more real than ever. This was not just a job offer. It was a thread that could pull her into a world of power, of lies, of things she had no control over. But something inside her, something deep and undeniable, urged her to take the chance. Cliffhanger. Sophie stood at the crossroads of her decision, the cold wind blowing through her hair. She had seen the world of power and danger Damien lived in. She had seen the loyalty in his eyes when he spoke of his mother. But there was something else in his gaze, something darker that warned her to tread carefully. As she stood there, lost in thought, the sound of an approaching car shattered the silence. She turned and saw Damien's car pull up to the curb. The door opened and his bodyguard stepped out. "Get in," the bodyguard said, his voice cold. "It's not safe here." Sophie hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. She had to decide, Would she walk away or would she step into the world that Damien Vortiga had offered her?